Okay, thank you very much. And that gives me the great pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Dr. Ariel Cohen, if you please.
Greetings. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor, and thanks for the Kingdom of Norway for sponsoring this program. I think without Western engagement in Central Asia, we would be deaf and blind to what's going on, and I will address that in the future. Today, we are at an inflection point. As COVID became a stress test to the states around the world and in Central Asia, the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan presents another stress test. This is a critical period in the national existence of Central Asian countries, probably the greatest test since 9/11, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, maybe even comparable with the influx of the Russian troops in the 1870s, when the independence of the Khanats of Khiva, Bukhara, and Samarkand was lost. The reason I'm comparing to these stress tests is because you have a new and powerful factor, and the reaction that we see throughout the regional capitals indicates how worried the leadership is, or the leaderships, plural, are in these capitals. You see President Rahman going to France, you see Foreign Minister Kamilov going to Afghanistan, so did Special Envoy Kazakhan from Kazakhstan. You saw Deputy Prime Minister Sardar Umurzakov negotiating intermezz with his Afghan counterpart on economic development. So these are the dots that we as analysts need to connect to discern what is going on, what is the thinking of the local leaderships. We also saw foreigners being involved. We saw just the other day the negotiations in Moscow, statements by Foreign Minister Lavrov, by Special Envoy Kabulov, and others, visits by American State Department senior officials, Wendy Sherman was in Tashkent, etc. So there's a lot of activity, but behind this activity, we as observers, as analysts, as decision makers, as writers about the region, need to understand what does it all mean. And what it means is that the model of statehood of Central Asia, the agency of Central Asian countries individually, of Central Asian ethnic groups and peoples, is challenged by a whole different paradigm, by a whole different concept. And that is the Islamist concept as expressed by different players in Afghanistan. I stress, by different players, not just by the Taliban as amorphous and non-centralized as it is, but also by other organizations the Taliban harbors or tolerates or shelters on its territory. Since the Peace of Westphalia, 1648, it is a nation state that is ultimately responsible for what's going on the territory they control. So as I'm looking at Afghanistan, I'm looking at the Islamic Party of Turkestan, I'm looking at Hizb ut-Tahrir al-Islami, I'm looking at ISIS-K, Al-Qaeda, the Uyghur movements, the Islamic Jihad of Turkestan. So these are actors that all of them allegedly disregard the ethnicity. I mean, Taliban is clearly a Pashtun movement, but the Islamist paradigm is that these ethnicities do not matter. You have fighters that come from Central Asia, thousands of them that came to Syria, to Iraq, and other places for jihad. They subscribed to this ideology, and that ideology, if not checked, if not rendered non-competitive by any means necessary, will challenge the statehoods of still newly independent state. 30 years in history is not a long time. So we are looking at the weaknesses of the nation states. We're looking at attempts to appease the new rulers in Kabul by giving them grain or giving them assistance or posturing, by making calls to unfreeze the monetary reserves of the previous government of Afghanistan. Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov the other day called for the unfreezing. Doesn't cost him a penny. But of course, as we heard in Moscow, as we hear in Washington, there is a long list of demands that are presented to the government in Kabul, and these demands are material. The purpose, and I submit to you, the purpose of these demands is to render that government less capable, I won't say incapable, less capable of challenging its neighbors and exporting its Islamist model, north, west, east to China, southeast to India, et cetera, et cetera. So when we talk about diversity, when we talk about representation of women, when we talk about observance of most basic standards of human rights, this is in order to make that government less of a jihadi or terrorist government and more of a normal, quote unquote, actor in international affairs. The challenge in Kabul that is directly relevant to Central Asians is whether that is a sui generis, a particularly national emirate, a particular national form of government that is not subject to exports, or this is a model that will be exported. It is the confrontation or competition between, for shorter term, just to encapsulate the terminology, between an emirate and a caliphate. And as I mentioned, there are actors, including ISIS-K, who are talking about a caliphate, and clearly you don't build a caliphate by staying in Kabul or staying in Kandahar. You do it by exporting that form of government, and you do it through a violent jihad. The role of outside players is important. The challenge for the local governments is who are the predominant outside players? Is it going to be still Russia that dominates in the security sphere? Is it going to be China that already dominates in the economic sphere? To what extent Turkey trying to build its Turkic union is going to play a role? When I was in Tashkent in July, I saw with which respect and importance Prime Minister Imran Khan of Pakistan was treated. They take Pakistan very seriously because of the historic Pakistani connection to the Taliban. So all these actors will have different influences and different roles. Clearly, Turkey will have a higher role, bigger role in Turkic-speaking countries, and less so, let's say, in Tajikistan. You also see the differences between the staunchly anti-Taliban position in Dushanbe versus attempts to understand, if not appease, the government in Kabul in other capitals. Russia very clearly signaled to Tajikistan that they do not want an escalation. They're not ready for the escalation. I believe they don't have the means to get engaged in a longer war. And very importantly, the question of this conference, what can the local governments do? They can clean up their act. When you read, as I did this morning, that in order to cross the border into Kyrgyzstan, the Kyrgyz pogranичники, the Kyrgyz border guards, are collecting fees from the trucks, the illegal fees, into their pockets. When you have reports of corruption day in and day out, when you have many instances of drug trafficking, of government that is abusing its powers, that will be the wood that the Taliban and other propagandists will throw into the fire of insurrection if and when it comes to discredit the existing regimes. So the existing regimes should fight for their lives and the legitimacy by cleaning up their act. Be it in improving services, in improving education, in fully legitimizing the more secular models in comparison with Kabul, which are a complex legacy. We don't have time to go into that. You know, the Soviet legacy, the Western influence of the last 30 years. But the fact that this is a different model, and we are in much more acute competition of a model that is more secular, that is more open, that allows women to walk unaccompanied and work, and people to travel. Thank goodness the American University in Kyrgyzstan took 241 students from Kabul, saved their lives possibly. And these are the examples of what the local people, organizations, and yes, governments can do. Help people who need that to save their lives, to save their future, to embrace them and take them in despite what Mr. Putin may be advising you. And I understand why Russia is so worried. Russia doesn't want an inflow of radical propagandists or worse, terrorists to come in from Afghanistan and destabilize Central Asia and possibly Muslim areas in Russia. I think my time is running out. I would summarize it and say this is a challenge for the civil society in each of the 5 Central Asian states. This is a challenge for regional players, for great powers such as Russia and China. I was saddened to see my country, the United States, not participating in the meeting in Moscow on Afghanistan. I don't know what these technical difficulties that Washington quoted were. I'm sure they were serious. I'm sure US was not getting something out of that meeting. But I said before and wrote that we made a mistake in the way we disconnected or ran from Afghanistan. We'll pay the price for that. People of Afghanistan will pay the price for it. But it means that we need to rebuild our engagement. We need to rethink it. We need to draw lessons, and we need to re-engage. And hopefully the governments in the region are not burned so badly by the United States that we will find the ways to build the bridges and re-engage with Central Asia again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to get more content like this.